Well, welcome everyone to this afternoon's Wizards of Ox live session. I'm Monique Attinger. I'm sitting in a lovely sunny Toronto area. We have Susan Owens here, who is the force behind the Triangle Oxalates group and the reason it exists. And we have our dear friend Karla Wiersma here. She and I are two of the early adopters of the diet, and the three of us here have more than 45 years experience just between the three of us. And so we are the Wizards of Ox. And what we are going to be talking about today is the symptoms that you get that can be overlapping between oxalate, histamine, and salicylate. So this is our ongoing series, which is laughingly titled Oxalate, Histamine, and Salicylate. Oh my. And so today, yes, we will be talking about symptoms. I'm going to ask everybody to please keep your video off while we're doing the session. That will allow us to maintain everyone's privacy. We're happy to have at the end of the live session to have folks unmute themselves and be able to show us your lovely faces. But in the meantime, if you can let us hold down the screen, we will be happy to do that. And I'm still allowing some people in, so bear with me while I also try to make sure that we've got everybody on who's coming on.
And we're waiting for our other wizard, Patricia De La Garza, and we're not really sure why she is not here, but we're waiting.
Yes, we are hoping that we will have our other wizard joining us shortly. So what we're going to do today is an educational session. We want to remind everyone that we assume that all of our wonderful members are under the care of a doctor and that you have trusted professionals who can help you monitor and track your health. And I just saw that Patricia's coming on board. This is awesome. Hello, Patricia. I was just introducing us all. So this is an educational session. This is for your information. Please always consult with your trusted medical professional before you make changes in what you're doing, either with your diet or with your supplements. But we would like you to also have the latest information and the best information that we've been able to put together. And so that's why we're here today to talk about the symptoms that people can experience with oxalate, salicylate, and histamine and how those things might overlap. Okay, and so we do have somebody here who's just learning, and that's great. Those are the people we want to be getting the message out to as well. So Patricia, I was going to use my hand-drawn diagram, which I can still do, because we're going to probably have to do revisions to it. So we also want to let everybody know here that the information that you're getting from us in these sessions is very new. So as a group here, we are continuing to try and put together a bigger picture for you and connect the dots. So you are going to be seeing our latest and greatest, but we had a bit of a chat before the session here, and we're already talking about some things which may have to migrate a little bit from one spot to another. So bear with us, and do keep in mind that this is preliminary information. I'm also going to ask one more time for people to mute themselves if they're not part of the presentation, because we want to make sure that everybody can hear what we're talking about. We are happy to unmute and chat for a little while after the session's over. Okay, so this has been very popular so far. We've got a lot of people online, so let's get going. So just by way of a little bit of background, I have a master's in library and information science. And one of the things that made me crazy as we started to talk about oxalate, histamine, and salicylate was wanting to understand the symptoms and kind of the arena in which you're seeing these symptoms. And so I very much wanted to categorize and make sure that there was some understanding about what things might be unique to one area, where the overlaps might occur, and where we might be getting symptoms that are really from all three. And so this is where this diagram has come from, and also from a laughing discussion among the wizards about the three-ring circus that our health can sometimes turn into. So we quite literally have lions, tigers, and bears on here. So does anybody else want to jump in here and talk a little bit about symptoms or about your own family's experience, so that we get a little bit of feedback from the group of us in terms of, you know, how this worked in their own families? Yeah, Patricia, kick us off.
I can just kick you off because I am by no means the most expert. I think it's really interesting for you to know that since the beginning of the project, the reports of symptoms that are coming when lowering oxalate have been changing. And it's something that has been really interesting to see, that there has been a progression. When we started in the project, and actually my daughter was part of like the second cohort of kids on the spectrum testing the low oxalate diet, we were not reporting a lot of, histamines or allergies or stuffy noses or things like that. The kinds of things that we were seeing, and I joined very clearly to oxalate, were things that, for example, here in this chart, Monique had written as salicylate, which would be something like coordination. One of the things that I keep telling you about, it's that incredible moment we had with my child when she was learning how to hula hoop. And we were with people doing ABA with her, applied behavioral analysis, which is very constant and took lots of repetition and things like that. And so we were hula hooping in that way, keeping track of what she was doing and how that was working and whatever. So I have the documentation in, probably nobody's ever recorded a hula hoop experience to that level of detail. But what was really interesting is that she was having one tour, two tours, one tour, and then, we were just keeping it up, just try to keep her mood up. She needs to go to the toilet. She has a bowel movement. That bowel movement, it is sand. It is sticky sand that it's just coming out of her. And you're like, oh my goodness, what is this? We have to clean this with water. I don't want to be extremely descriptive, but it was obviously a dump. And I clean her up and put some little cologne on her, whatever. We go out into the session room. She grabs the hula hoop and does over 100 tours with that thing. And there's her therapist, her mother, the camera, and everybody's jaw is on the floor, because the only thing that happened between one moment and the next was a bowel movement. So for us, that was extremely clear. And so that's why I put coordination here in orange as something that might indeed be related to salicylates, but in our observation, clearly related to oxalate. So I think that just kind of like sets a little bit the mood where, when things say, well, everybody says this does that, but sometimes, different observations allow us to make maybe a little nuanced statements. And I think that's part of science. I think that's exactly what we're talking about. When we ask in the group, tell us about your experiences, because those experiences give us clues and things, to go and take a dive in the literature to understand what you guys are seeing. So I'm done.
Well, we were just talking, your microphone's off, Monique.
Sorry about that. I was just going to say that's a great revision. Thanks for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were talking before we started, some of us wizards, that, there are different ways of gathering information. And, there is a scientific process which controls things and, sets up an experiment so that we can make sure that it's only one thing that's causing something else. And that's extremely valuable research to be done. And, I presented on the last one some evidence about how both salicylate and histamine seem to be regulators of oxalate transport. And so there is a reason scientifically that these things are all connected. But what we're looking at right now today is how things are experientially connected. And so we're trying to put together a lot of information that we've heard from various sources. I know that Monique, for instance, has been looking really hard at the literature, even trying to find backup for the relationship of each one of these things to certain symptoms and that sort of thing. And so we will continue that effort. But we just want to know that you're part of our team, because your observations as somebody who is reducing oxalate and somebody who may have, gone into the histamine area or the salicylate area and have noticed that certain things changed with certain treatments and things like that, that is incredibly important. So I don't want you to feel like that you are a lesser member of our team, because our team is really, really big. And I want every one of you to feel like your experience is being valued, because it really is, because we have our ears open. And so please feel like you're part of this process. And I just wanted to say that as a kind of an opener. And I'll hand it over probably to Monique or.
Yeah, I think all three of us can probably speak about this, and like whatever experience that you had with raising your lovely daughter may be appropriate as well. But what I remember from when I joined the Triangle Oxalates group, all that 15 years ago, what was really interesting was that we didn't really know anything about how salicylate or how oxalate could be, a histamine as well, could be related to each other. And so one of the things that I didn't pay any attention to at the time, but which is a really important aspect of what we may have experienced as symptoms, are these overlaps. And so as I was working my way through these symptoms and seeing what buckets I would put them in, what I realized is that my son, who has issues with asthma and sleep seem to be big symptoms for him, but all of a sudden out of the blue, he would get red ears. And I had no idea what red ears meant, but it looks like we had some level of salicylate issue here. And big in the salicylate world is some of these emotional regulation kinds of issues as well. And my young daughter would go from happy and bouncy to crying and completely distraught with not enough time for her mother to actually make the transition with her. And I got to the point where I went, oh, every time this happens to her, if she has an Epsom salts bath, she does better. And so, you know, clearly there was some level of oxalate aspect there. But we were talking a little bit before the meeting about the fact that bicarbonate may be a thing which is helping with histamine. Perhaps it helps with salicylate. And for sure, if I dropped her into an Epsom salts bath, I always combined a little bit of baking soda with it. And my daughter would go from completely beside herself and emotionally distraught and saying really hard things like, Mama, I shouldn't have been born at 4, and 5, which just hurts your heart, right? And then 10, 15 minutes in that bath, and she would be right as rain. So, you know, I found it really interesting. We knew about the histamine piece because my son got asthma symptoms when he would dump oxalate. And so that was really obvious. And the fact that we stopped having to give him antihistamines all through spring when things were blooming and grass was growing, you know, clearly said that there was an overlap between oxalate and histamine, at least for my son. But this salicylate piece is something I've only recognized in the rearview mirror. How about you, Karla? Like we've got like that wonderful story about Patricia's daughter and the hula hoop and getting her coordination back is so cool. But I think you had some run-ins with both histamine and salicylate as well, right?
We did, but when we knew about the salicylate issues before starting low oxalate, so you know, there was really, we didn't make any connection. I mean, he had the hyperactivity, he had the red ears, he had the emotional volatility, sensory processing issues, fine motor issues, wavering between hyperfocus and inability to focus. And doing the Feingold diet actually, you know, helped eliminate a lot of that. The histamine issues didn't start until we were fairly well into to the diet, and he didn't, you know, his main symptoms were really just the red elbows and knees that we had talked about in our last session. And then we found out that the salicylate issues came back when he was going through the histamine issues, and one of the mothers on the group had said, you know, are you starting to see salicylate issues? And the day that she brought up the question was the day that my kid's ears turned red again, and he ended up with a red rear, and which was a salicylate reaction. And I was like, girl, are you psychic or something? You know, we just saw this, you know, 30, 40 minutes ago. And she was like, I'm telling you, we haven't been able to figure it out, but there's a connection. And she says, you know, she found that with her daughter when she was going through histamine reactions, all of a sudden salicylate reactions would crop right up in there. And now we're at the point, you know, this was probably 7, 8 years ago, but now we're not seeing any of it. You know, he doesn't, you know, really have the red ears, the hyperactivity. You know, he's a pretty mellow dude now, and we haven't had histamine issues in years.
If I can just add something, I just want to commend Karla because she's so clear in her explanations, and she always tells about what happened before and after. And that is because she writes things down. Because let me tell you that if you don't write it down, the change doesn't exist, and transitions don't exist. And the other thing that's really important is that usually when things disappear, we just assume magically they grew, they evolved, they became better, whatever. But it's actually the result of a lot of little actions. So just the quick reminder, of how important it is to just be very aware and to keep documenting what's happening, because if ever it comes back, you have a baseline to see what's changed. And that's priceless information.
Well, and understanding that things may not, it may not be permanent.
Mhm.
And really the logging, I'm kind of a geek about that. I'll admit it. I log everything. But the one thing that the biggest benefit was when I thought that things were not going well for him, that, you know what, we're in a rut. I could actually look back and see, well, no, we're not in a rut. There were a lot of little positive steps. There may have been one or two setbacks, but there were positive steps that I could say, you know what, looking back at this in the last 6 months, you know what?
We're
He's,
ahead.
yeah, he's not where he was 6 months ago. And it's those, a lot of little things can accumulate and become a big thing overall. And sometimes people are looking for the big wows, and you don't always get them. I mean, we had quite a few, with Ian, where it was like, whoa, what happened? Where was the kid that I had yesterday? I think, the aliens must have snagged him and replaced him with another kid, because I don't recognize you. But that didn't happen that often. But the little positive steps did. And I can't tell you as a parent how much I got out of that, because it was just another reminder not to give up on him, and not to give up on what we were doing. And sometimes, you need that hope. And logging, yeah, that'll help you get that.
Absolutely.
Can I make a little comment? When my daughter had to have a lot of therapy when she was little, I started reading books about sensory integration. She had to have sensory integration training. And when I was reading these books, I was like, oh my gosh, that's like my childhood. I had that issue. And so if I really think about it, I think I had more of these histamine and salicylate problems than my daughter ever had. And so, but back then, they just thought, oh, well, you need allergy shots or, that kind of thing. And so there wasn't as much understanding of how all these things fit together. But you may have some memories from your own childhood where you can think about, well, what happened to me? And I encourage you to think that way, because it's not just your child, or it's not just you now, but maybe it's even when you were a child.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because I remember having intermittent hives. So it would happen very much out of the blue, no real warning, but perhaps it was corresponding to when I was, in the week or so before that, having eaten really high oxalate food. Because I remember out of the blue, I wasn't a generally allergic kid. I didn't have to take antihistamines for, allergy season and stuff like that. But I was in my 20s and I had this job, and I went in one morning and I was doing some things with my desk, and I had touched my countertops and I had scratched my face a little bit, and I don't know what happened because I didn't have a mirror. But I walked into a meeting and my boss goes, "Oh my God, what happened to your face?" And I walk over to a mirror that was in the meeting room, and I had like huge hives starting to come up on my face. got sent to emergency, had to take antihistamines for about 3 weeks while the reaction kind of worked its way out of my system. And then it never happened again. So, you know, it's a really great story that Patricia was telling about an oxalate dump and then such a quick change in a symptom. And, you know, I can't say for sure what it was that I had done before that, because I was in my 20s, I was on a co-op term. I wasn't tracking what I was eating. I was eating whatever, right? But who knows? Maybe I had had one of them spinach salads that I used to like in the day. And then all of a sudden, this histamine reaction. And for sure, we saw some things during dumping that in hindsight would be related to salicylate. Oh, and before I forget, as I was going through research and looking for published reports on what's a salicylate symptom, what's a histamine symptom, what's an oxalate symptom, one of the things that I found, which makes our little 3-ring circus here even more interesting, is that salicylate is now understood to be a mast cell trigger. We know that oxalate's a likely mast cell trigger because it sets off the inflammasome. You know, so we do have these interrelationships which may be affecting us in all kinds of ways. I'm going to mute again so I can help somebody here.
Well, I will say that, you know, the inflammasome was discovered in the year 2002. And so, my goodness, I mean, I was born in 1954, so I had a lot of life before that year came. And, you know, it probably takes about 10 years for any major finding to work its way into what other scientists are looking at and everything. So I remember that when I was coming up, I went to school at a place where we had some fabulous cooks, and they would cook our lunch for us. And so every now and then they would have spinach, and nobody in my class wanted to eat spinach. But I loved spinach. So everybody was piling their spinach up on my plate so that they couldn't, you know, leave the lunchroom unless they had cleared their plate. That was one of the rules of the school. And so this was when I was developing all these allergies and sensitivities and asthma and all of these sorts of things. And so, you know, it's hard because nobody was thinking about that sort of thing to, you know, chronicle that, but it's still worth thinking about.
Absolutely. Another point that I think it's important to consider is, why would the body give coordination issues for oxalate instead of just salicylate? Or if you've been in touch with salicylate and not with oxalate, why does that give that reaction? And the fact is, I think something that has helped me understand it is to stop thinking of linearly. You know, I eat this, I get that. But it's more like if I live in a city and I'm not alone in this city. So this is not only Patricia. This is Patricia and all of her microbiome, whether it's in the mouth, in the ears, on the skin, on my private parts or whatever. It's, I am a community, and it's a community that is supposed to work with each other. And they are going to take priority depending on the situation of the environment and the well-being of the entire community. So even if you're taking in something, and, you know, I get, when I'm talking to some parents, I always get like, well, I can't take this supplement because that happens. And I'm trying to get everybody to grow into the idea that if you're getting that A to B reaction, it's not necessarily an A to B reaction. It's probably because you're desperately in need of M. And so when you give A, then you have a little bit more to produce some M, which is short in supply. but then that's going to cause a backlog reaction of something else. And I don't know if I'm making myself clear, but it's just like this, the story that it's going on. It's usually a lot more complex than just it's this or that or that. And I think that's a little bit also where we want to, what we want to convey in this particular session of the oxalate, salicylate, and histamine story. We have transporters, we have all sorts of different requirements of the cell to maintain balance. And if you have too much of one thing, you might want to lower it here by putting it somewhere else, or you have all these different mechanisms. And I think, and I would love, for you guys to, move it a little bit into this direction. But I think if we stop thinking of a reaction, I take an aspirin, salicylate, it takes away the headache, but it gives me a red ears, whatever. There's a lot more going on than just, a light bulb going in your ears. So I would love for everybody to start thinking in this way and just starting to try to relate what's happening to other issues that you might be having.
Yeah, it's a lot more complicated than, there's so many people now talking about root causes, and it's a lot more complicated than a single root cause, because all these things are impacting each other. And so we may not completely understand the body's priorities, but the body's first priority is to keep you alive. So you may be getting a symptom you don't really like. And it may be because your body's doing something that's really urgent that you really need. So I'd also suggest that maybe we start to think about symptoms as signposts and not necessarily just another bad thing that's happening to us. Because maybe we're getting some, really good information about other steps that we can take, maybe temporary changes in our diet that we may need to do. We didn't actually reduce histamine or reduce salicylate because I just assumed if it was low oxalate, it was okay. But maybe there's, some recognition of some ebb and flow. If we're dealing with one kind of symptom, maybe we need to reduce our intake of salicylate temporarily or take a supplement that helps to handle salicylate. And same sort of thing in the histamine world, reduce how much histamine we're taking in or take supplements that are going to help us with it as part of the process to try and support our body as it's dealing with this 3-ring circus too.
We actually did a rotation diet and a low salicylate, and at some point occasionally low histamine, mainly because the histamine reactions scared the dickens out of me. And my biggest fear was we're going to go from, just the red elbows and the red knees to, oh my God, I need an EpiPen. And that just terrified me. So, at that point we went, okay, we're probably going to have to go medium oxalate, low histamine. And
yeah,
with
and take
the
some
idea
of
that
the
it's
pressure
going,
off, right?
yes, but with the idea that it's going to be temporary. And it was the same thing with salicylate. I looked at the food list we had, looked at the Feingold list, because at the time that was, at least here, that was more well known than the RPAH list, and went, okay, this is low oxalate, this is low oxalate, low salicylate, low salicylate, got to remove this food temporarily. And we essentially did an elimination diet initially. We just removed all the stuff that was medium and high oxalate, but was also, or low oxalate, but was also high salicylate, and then gave his body a chance to kind of settle. And then we would add in, one that was moderate salicylate, see how he reacted. Take that out of the menu, wait another 4 days, add that back in, and just started rotating foods to see what he would tolerate. And then we used enzymes to help. And then, eventually he was able to pretty much have everything. I think citrus was a big trigger for him. And so we had to have citrus with enzymes. And then eventually we didn't have to have that. And when we had to do low histamine, it was, a lot of the foods were also low oxalate. So we went, okay, what's the priority? At the time, for me, the priority wasn't oxalate. So it was histamine. So we'll bump you up medium oxalate, make sure you're low histamine, and start adding in, the foods to see what he could handle. And, eventually we were able to add everything back in. And, we looked at probiotics that helped reduce that histamine load. We looked at, things like quercetin, things to help, but, there's nothing wrong with doing a rotation diet, to kind of let things settle and understand that it doesn't have to be permanent. Maybe it's 3-4 months, maybe it's 6 months, maybe it's a year, but in our case and in a lot of other cases, it's a temporary thing.
Yeah, it was definitely temporary here. I mean, we just sort of pushed through and kind of brute forced it, which at the time it was what we understood, was that oxalate was the guy that we had to deal with. And so I kind of ignored any other kind of reaction. If it was low oxalate, we ate it. And we were lucky enough that worked okay. And that things like Epsom salts baths with baking soda seemed to help in multiple ways, so that over time histamine reactions were coming down and red ears disappeared and things like that.
Well,
but yeah.
I think a lot of times there's a fear that, I'm already on a restricted diet. I'm doing low oxalate. I can't, this is like a step too far.
Yeah.
I can't keep reducing. Well, yeah, actually you can, but it doesn't, it's not doesn't have to be a life sentence, put it that way.
Yeah, it can be temporary, where you're rotating things or you're doing something for a while your body's under pressure. So, if you're having more histamine symptoms, maybe you take histamine foods and histamine triggers out for a while, but then, exactly as Karla was saying, you start to test, can I have something that's a little more moderate? Am I doing okay with that?
Yeah.
And then slowly work it back in.
And I get that it's a big fear. Elimination diets scared the bejesus out of me, because I've seen folks go from, my kid can't handle corn. Okay, so we pull everything that's corn related out of the diet. Now he can't handle latex, so that's bananas and other things. Well, now my kid can't handle strawberries, can't handle this, and then suddenly, how did I go? Now I have a kid that can only eat 5 or 6 things.
Yeah.
That just terrifies me. So I'm definitely not advocating that. And I'm full advocate of temporary.
Yep.
Just wanted to add that, like, we've had a lot of rain lately in Dallas. And so when we get a lot of rain, then there's a lot more Like there are things blooming and pollen and things like that. So there's a lot of external burden that's put on the immune system at that time. And so, if I were to take my reactions during the week when all of this other stuff is going on, I might exaggerate that something is more of a permanent problem. And I think the thing that I'm hearing all of you ladies saying is that you've got to think about these things as not being a life sentence. It's more that it is a temporary situation that you're trying to adjust to. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Yep,
Yes.
I'd agree. I mean, really what we want to do ultimately is eat, a varied diet and avoid, when we talk about oxalate, we do have a clear toxin here. It's not maybe sort of kind of depending on your metabolism. It's a metabolic endpoint in our bodies, and I'd say it's a pretty clear toxin, but we don't want it to become, I think we've had some folks on the group who may have been in this position where they've almost become food phobic, and we don't want that. What we want is for everybody to be thinking about eating as much variety as possible without thinking that, that's putting them at risk. And at the same time, one thing that I'd like to suggest is that, when you get to some of these more restrictive lists, like we've talked about with our, combination of oxalate, histamine, and salicylate all being low, it's not so much that you're necessarily as restricted as you think either. So let me just explore this a little bit, because I think we have to also remember to exploit the food list that's available to us as completely as possible. So I'll give you a great example from our lives, which is radishes. I had never eaten a cooked radish in my life. And one of the things I discovered when we first went low oxalate was that radishes were low. So then I thought, okay, I've never introduced my kids to radishes. I'm going to plant them in our garden. It'll be lots of fun, right? So we plant it in the garden. I serve it up raw, and my kids go, ew, this is terrible. And I went, uh-oh, because I had a whole row of these radishes in my garden. And I thought, I'm not going to eat all these radishes alone. So then I Googled cooked radishes, and my world opened up into a whole other way to deal with radishes. And honestly, that was a really great thing for us, because my kids loved them cooked, loved them. And then we found out that radish greens were low oxalate as well. And so this became the kind of thing we put in our garden, and we would harvest a bunch, keep the radishes themselves for another day, eat the greens right away, put the radish, bulbs in stir fries, use them as a way to make a potato salad where it wouldn't be as high oxalate, all kinds of great things. But if I had looked at the food list initially and said, oh no, we're never going to eat radishes, we'd have missed out there. So please recognize that most of us have a very standard list of foods that we tend to eat. That's why your shopping list works. That's why you're buying the same things every week. And maybe part of what you're called to do in order to be able to get yourself as much variety as possible is like jump on board and try the odd new thing, because it really was an eye-opener. I'm sitting right now in this chair while I've got this huge daikon radish downstairs in my fridge, and my kids are like, ew, what's going to happen? Like, they want to know if it's going to be baked fries or if it's going to go into stir fries or what I'm going to do with it. So, and that's a food we had never eaten before getting on board with low oxalate, I'd eaten the little red radishes, but these big daikon radishes I'd never tackled. So many ways that we can support ourselves and maybe find a new favorite food. Like, you just never know.
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky to have a kid that he's pretty adventurous eater, so he had no problems with butternut squash fries, jicama fries, turnip fries, rutabaga fries, and I would occasionally throw some regular French fries in there. He didn't care. And I got to admit, I was not real big on the turnip fries, but hey, more for him.
Yeah.
So, he was pretty adventurous, and the kids take a lot of your attitude. So when I would say, what do you try? What do you think about trying this? Oh, these are pretty good. Chayote squash, made some fries out of those too, and loved them. So there is variety to be had.
And the chayote turned out to be another one that became a favorite here. So, and again, never had encountered that in my life.
Monique, can you unmute Susan, please?
Yeah, sorry, I had set people that they couldn't unmute. So let me fix Susan. That wasn't how I wanted that.
But,
Okay, I'm sorry. I just wanted to say, I wanted to put a plug in to our food and recipes subgroup, because from what Monique was saying, I mean, she was saying that she didn't know anything about radishes or using that. And so one of the reasons we have this subgroup is so that you can get on there and you can go, oh my gosh, I would never think of making that out of that. And this is the way that you can expand your diet into some of these areas when you've had to restrict your diet because of a temporary situation with histamine or salicylate or something like that. Then you need to be able to expand your diet into some areas where maybe you have never explored before. And it's just amazing how much inspiration you can get from other people.
yeah, one of the things we do every week here is that we have an international day. So we have a day, we have a vegetarian day, then we have a Mexican day, I'm Mexican, have a Belgian day, my husband's Belgian, and then we have an international day. And that's always a big challenge, and it's always lovely and it's fun. And my kids, really enjoy it. So we go and look for special recipes. So we've learned to cook with like rice paper, and we've learned to do all sorts of things, with Asian things and different types of goulash with different ingredients, to change and transform. I like some Latin American stews that are absolutely delicious, and they're just different. And I think just having a recipe and having a challenge and making it fun makes a huge, huge difference. But one of the things that I also wanted to share with you guys is that idea of I already said it, of that idea of balance and that idea of priority by the body. And when we were talking last time, we had a visual that we thought was really funny and really clear about what we were talking about. So if I may, I want to just share it. But just go ahead. I'm looking for it. I had it here and I'm just looking for it. So I'll bring it up as soon as I have it.
Okay, perfect. So just to kind of recap a little bit here, if you're doing a low oxalate diet and suddenly you are stumbling into what look like salicylate reactions, they absolutely could be. What looks like histamine reactions, that absolutely could be going on. And you could see a combination of symptoms, and some of that is going to look like something else, right? And not necessarily just oxalate. So a lot of people have said to me off and on over the years, it looks like oxalate does everything, you know, and we can't blame everything on oxalate. And I think part of what our intention here today is to say oxalate can be doing lots of things, and there can be these overlaps in symptoms, and just to give you a heads up on it. So you don't necessarily have to assume that anything that happens in your body is oxalate, although I still swear I need to make t-shirts that say, when in doubt, blame oxalate. But that being said, you know, we do have kind of a 3-ring circus. There is a playing field here, and oxalate, histamine, salicylate, we know these things are influencing each other and in a variety of ways. So we, you know, Susan will be continuing to look at how those dots connect. I will probably have more fun finding where there's published research which says that some of these things are doing similar things. We will have a bibliography of research for you before we're done our oxalate, histamine, and salicylate oh my series. And just want our folks to be aware that this is one of those things where you can have some complexities along the road, but it doesn't mean that you're stuck in a restrictive food list and not eating the kinds of things you like forever. But you may have to experiment with some things. Have you got your visual for us, Patricia?
It's not the oldie that I had. I don't know why I can't find it, but yes, I have one, so I can share it.
Go ahead.
So, but it's a shame that it's not the beautiful one that we had from way back when.
Well, we can always dig that up and make sure that that's part of what we can provide to people.
Consultez vos comptes ou vérifiez vos assurances. Choisissez It's Me. C'est super facile et super sécurisé.
Are you kidding me? I am signed in. There you go.
Oh, the spinning plate.
Oh,
We had
yeah.
talked about this. And yeah, we've started up without our spinning plates.
Yeah, I'm sorry. No, we'll play after the ad.
Jusqu'à 30% de réduction sur une sélection de marques de cosmétiques décoratifs, telles que MAC Cosmetics et MIC Professional Makeup. Achetez les produits de beauté en ligne de manière simple et pratique. Nothing no.
Right now, it's time for our first performer for the evening. And they come in the tradition of fabulous novelty acts such as plate spinning acts that we've had on our really tune. This young fellow is outstanding, and you're going to really get it. All the way in from Denmark. Really hear it for right here in our school.
So this is from Ed Sullivan, for those
That is the
old
youngest
enough.
Ed Sullivan I've ever seen.
So this is from way back in the day.
Way.
Oh, did you find it?
No, it's you've got it up and it's starting to run. We can also give them the link for this because it really is a great explanation in so many ways of how you can have the body managing all these different processes and having to prioritize in order to keep all the plates spinning. So yeah.
Can you match? Okay, we're good.
I don't know why it's not letting me do the full screen. But we get the idea. I think we've all seen that. And I think it's just so important to remember that even though, you know, we talked last time that salicylate and histamine were things that were actually used in the body. There's a reason for them. So there's histamine. Without histamine, we wouldn't have a lot, of our memories. That was one of the things that Susan was talking about, which I thought was fascinating. How memory.
Sleep and wakefulness wouldn't be managed the same way without it. Yeah.
Exactly. So a lot of the things that we might very easily say, oh, take an antihistamine. Well, no, because last time, and we're going to put the link to last time discussion. Last time we said antihistamines, guess what? They could raise your oxalosis. They could raise how much oxalate you have in your body. And then your body's saying, oh my goodness, I need to remember this. You're studying, you're concentrating, you're stressed. I have pollen coming in. And then I also have to deal with this toxin because they just ate a huge spinach salad, like, Susan said, and they piled it up on my plate because nobody else would eat it. And so the body is trying to go, oh my gosh, I have all these things to do at the same time. And then the adaptogens in our body, who are they? It's our microbiome. So they're saying, oh my God, what did you do, Susan? So much spinach. And, they're trying to eat it out, but they're dying on the way and they're on their way out. And then the body's saying, well, I don't know what to do with all of this. There's nobody else to eat it. So I'm just going to absorb it and stick it somewhere. No, but wait a minute. I can't use it because it's stuck somewhere. I'm just going to put it someplace. Here, there's a hole, where she twisted her ankle the other time. And I'm just going to stick it in there. But it's going to hurt. Yeah, but it's better that it's there than in her lungs, because the other day she had an asthma attack. And she still has to remember all of those things because tomorrow she has an exam. So that's exactly what our body's doing all the time. It's just saying, okay, I have all these ingredients to be working with. And I have to make some priorities because I want to keep my balance, my homeostasis, my health, my wellness, my well-being. So we thought this was a really clear way of remembering it, that even though we are seeing like mucus and sinus pain and pressure, that mucus is there so that it catches all the pollen so that when we sneeze, it'll come out and I don't have to deal with it anymore. So instead of demonizing foods or reactions or symptoms or whatever, we have to start realizing exactly where it's coming from. What is the body trying to do? And the most important thing, how we can support it in its absolute mission to make us be the best that we can be. So I think on our side, we just have to make sure that we give them all the ingredients and try to remove all the things that it doesn't want. But the idea is to have a body in balance.
Okay, everyone. Well, we are at 2:59. I will sign us off here. So from Patricia De La Garza in Europe, from Karla Wiersma in Colorado, from Susan Owens in Texas, from Monique Attinger in Ontario, just outside Toronto. And for those of you who are available and can stay on and chat with us for a bit, we will open up the mics then. But in the meantime, we'll see you again in a couple of weeks for more on oxalates, histamines, and salicylates. Oh my. Have a great day, everyone.